called H.B. Bell, in here to give you some wisdom and some knowledge combined and weaved together. Dr. Mark, how are you today?
We're doing real well, thank you. Looking real fine outside the window in Indianapolis today.
And today we're going to have a great topic and a great guest. Mr. Christopher Mann will be in on the second hour. But in this first hour, we're going to be talking about participating in the public square.
Yes,
what does it mean?
Yes,
what does it mean, sir?
What does it mean? Yeah, the key to participating in the public square. The public square is just a metaphor for a place where people congregate, discuss, dialogue, get together, have a voice, and more importantly, I think, listen. This is one of the big problems I think we face just in any culture is that folks aren't listening to each other. You got a word on that?
I think we do. What we're going to do is take a short break. When we come back, we're going to introduce you to the public square and hopefully learn how to listen today. This is Warp and Woof Radio on the Cool Groove site. RadioNext.tv on the Cool Groove site. And that is the United Tenors Hear Our Praise. And we just wanted to get that segment started with the influence of our Lord and Savior. Because you don't know up in here at RadioNext.tv. We are faith-based and we are Christian men up in here trying to bring wisdom and knowledge together as we continue to bring our community together. And Dr. Mark Eckel, just before we get going, please tell them about the Comenius Institute and the great work you're doing over at the IUPUI campus. Absolutely.
So Comenius Institute is a wonderful bridge opportunity between high school and college for young people who are transitioning into higher education, many of whom are believers in Jesus. Some are not, but that doesn't matter to us. We're just anxious to be involved in a conversation of academics and intellectual pursuits. Yesterday, for instance, we dealt with everything in our discussion group between war and online dating and marriage and subjects of study. I mean, we were just all over the place.
Yeah. But it's all relevant because basically what you're doing is you're introducing new subject matter to a fresh mind.
Yes.
Minds that have been kind of left out of the equation. And we said all the time, innocence and ignorance is acceptable because that way you don't know. But once you have the tools and are equipped with that information, now you can start making decisions that are relevant in life. As we mentioned today, participating in the public square. Unpack this idea.
Yeah, this is an interesting discussion point because a lot of folks, they might have heard the phrase the public square, but they don't necessarily know what that is. So to begin, let me say I'm actually teaching a course right now entitled Cultural Analysis and Engagement. And the idea behind the course is actually to do just that, to analyze, which means we're thinking about something, we're pondering, considering it, asking questions, making suggestions. But then the engagement is also, hey, how and where and when do we participate? All of those things are crucial to us. Mm-hmm. Now, what was really fascinating to me is my friends Lachelle and Liz helped me put together a video series. We've got 6 5-minute videos on this cultural analysis and engagement question. And we ended each of the segments with the ing words, so longing and loving and learning. And the idea of ing is an active, ongoing, present thing that's going to consistently be a part of the culture. So we're introducing students to historians, to scientists, to educators, to politicians. It doesn't matter, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, right now you're in the public square, so how are you going to participate in the public square?
And so basically we're talking communication.
Absolutely, again.
And we were talking off the air about listening.
Yes.
And the art of listening. And most times we as people, we're hearing what we're wanting to hear to say what we want to say versus hearing and digesting what the other person is saying.
That's right, yeah.
So how do we, I mean, I'm getting a little bit off track, but how do we start acquiring this skill to where listening is effective?
Yeah.
Listening now turns into, okay, I heard what this person says. Mm-hmm. What can I do about the situation, or what should I manifest from this situation?
Sure. You know, honestly, human beings are so self-centered. We are really focused on me, myself, and I. And so I would say that the first step in listening is shut up. If I could be so bold, just shut up and hear what somebody else is saying. The second step, I would say, is when you're hearing what somebody else is saying, you're actually participating with their words. That means you're not thinking ahead, gee, I don't agree with this, and I'm going to say 1, 2, and 3 things after they get done. No, you're not thinking those things. You're thinking, gee, I've never heard these ideas before. This is a real crucial concept. This person's introducing me to a whole new way of thought process here. Maybe is there some way that I can engage with them in some part or person that they're invested in? All of those things are important in listening. So when you talk about communication, the first step in communication is listen.
And that means be quiet, because you can't talk and listen at the same time, I was once told. And you know, the wisest man in the Bible, so they say, is Solomon.
Yep.
And so how, since we always use Proverbs,
yes,
and Solomon is pretty much the scriber
yep.
of Proverbs. If you didn't know that, Bible people, we're going to teach
there
you about
go.
that too.
There you go.
Anyway, how does he deal with in his thoughts on the public square?
Sure.
Based off of Proverbs.
Yeah. One of the great little lines in Proverbs that I love to repeat to people is this line out of Proverbs 11:10. Proverbs 11:10 says, "By the blessing of the upright, a city is exalted." Think about that. By the blessing of the upright. That means that the upright people, that is, people who are doing good in the community. We're always talking about this, Titus 3, do good, do good, do good. Those people who are a blessing to the city are going to make it upright. They're going to benefit the city. They're going to produce a good welfare and good benefit in lots of different ways to the city. And I would like to expand that even to other passages in the book of Proverbs, like Proverbs 28 and 29, for instance. If you flip through that and just kind of scan Proverbs 28 and 29, you see over and over again the kinds of statements about the king. What happens if the king is good? What happens if the king is bad? The king listens to good advice. The king listens to bad advice. There's all those kinds of statements in there. And not only that, but women. The Proverbs 31 passage is huge, because the woman of Proverbs 31, the righteous woman, she is not only doing it in the home with her children and with her husband and engaging that particular community, but also outside of that. She's buying and selling in the city square. She's investing in possible future potentials for her family and the community. All of those things in Proverbs chapter 31. Now, if we take that a little bit further, we think about the men sitting in the gate. If you see that in the Bible where it says, and the men were sitting in the gate, this means this is where things were happening. This is the public square. This is where ideas were being given back and forth in the marketplace of ideas.
Interesting that you mentioned the exchange of ideas. I say it all the time in this marketplace of Radio Next.
Yes.
Right now, information is the commodity of today's time. That is the commodity. We're not making refrigerators. We're not making cars. Machines are making cars. So now what people have the gift to do is, as you say, communicate, exchange ideas for the betterment of the city.
Well, think about this and spin off into a commercial I heard from Purdue University just yesterday on the radio. I was listening, and they were talking about this is a marketplace of ideas. And you know, the first person I thought of was you.
well, thank you.
You're the man with the information. You're connecting all these different people. Even before I got on air today, HB's introducing me to all different kinds of folks. We're going to get different people in here constantly because we're really interested in doing what Proverbs 11:10 says, by the blessing of the upright, a city is exalted.
Now, which Christians should be contributing to the civic responsibility, and why should they?
Yeah. Boy, these are important questions. So let's make this real simple. Which Christians? Every Christian. So let's just put that right out there.
I was hoping that was the answer, but I said, let me just make sure that this is the answer, because we all have something to contribute to the body.
Absolutely. So let me tell you a couple of stories of what happened to me this week. I'm taking courses at IUPUI, and I am loving my courses. I'm taking one on literature criticism, another one in children's literature. So this week I had to do a presentation on villains in fairy tales. Okay, you're thinking maybe Bluebeard or the Wolf and Red Riding Hood, that kind of stuff. And when I was doing this, and I was writing this presentation, and we had a discussion in class, I said to my professor, I cannot do a presentation on villains unless I talk about good and evil. And I can't talk about good and evil unless there's a standard for good and evil. And there's got to be a standard outside of us, outside of this class, outside of human beings, and that's got to come from another place, like, maybe heaven, And so we had this big discussion about this, and that was really crucial. So as an academic, so I'm an academician, I'm a guy who loves to read and learn and write and research and then go teach and talk about these things, even on air like I'm doing right now. This is huge. What I'm doing right now, to me, is what I'm made to do. So I'm an academic. To answer the question, let's go back to the question. Which Christian should contribute in civic responsibility? Every Christian. That includes me as an academic. That includes HB as a communicator, as an information digester, and then cross-pollination person. We're all about whatever it is that we're doing is important.
And that leads back to, and I hate stealing other people's verbiage, but Brother Nuri Muhammad said it the best. He said the liver, the heart, the lung, the kidney, and the brain are nothing alike, but every day they wake up and say, let's get this cat up and go make something happen. We'll be right back. You're listening to Warp and Woof Radio on the Cool Groove site at RadioNext.tv. RadioNext.tv on the Cool Groove site. You are listening to Warp and Woof Radio and Dr. Mark Eckel, Harold H.B. Bell, and we are talking about participating in the public square. And speaking of which, when you came in, I showed you this diagram about the Indianapolis Hive, and this goes so well inside the Warp and Woof philosophy.
Absolutely.
And what this is these are hives that are going to be generated all across the country, Mark, including libraries, museums, schools, nonprofit organizations, educators, engineers, designers, where we can now have a whole program for our young people that are going out there in the world, as you mentioned, for the first time.
That's right.
We need more than one model to try to educate our young people.
Absolutely.
And that's part of the communication process and part of the working together, knowing what you're equipped to do. And we talk about it. We were just talking about
that.
What are you designed to do?
Yep.
Do that, and then let somebody else handle the stuff that you don't do well, because you'll spend 80% of your time trying to do 10% of something.
Yes.
When you could spend 80% of the time maxing out your 90% of quality. So,
there you go.
In talking about that, we're talking about Christians and how they need to fit in where they get in.
Sure.
And how do Christians benefit the culture? How do you think they benefit the culture? And then tell us about something that you've read or done this week, current event that has you into a different culture that's making you more aware, Mark.
Sure, absolutely. So let me just backtrack a second to highlight some other folks that are doing some great things here. I wanted to tell people about some upcoming guests that are going to be on the show. We've got Kevin Russell, who is working for DOC, Department of Corrections, in a faith-based model. I was just talking to a new acquaintance, Tanya, this morning.
Yes.
And chatting with her a little bit.
The New Living Center.
There you go. So some of the same things she's doing, Kevin's doing that with men. Joanna Taft from Harrison Center for the Arts will be in a couple weeks. Lori Borgman, a syndicated writer, seen all across the country, will be here. And then in May, the 1st of May, we've got Pastor Hank Hankerson, who's going to come up in here and talk about jazz.
That's going to be good.
Oh, I cannot wait for that.
Now, if I start acting like a groupie, forgive me. No, man, this is legendary. This is legendary in the jazz field in Indianapolis, and unbelievable that he's going to be in here. So.
It is a wonderful opportunity. Let me just tell you about some of the things I've been reading about. If you want to go on to a website called The Public Square, literally, that's what it's called, you might want to check out what they have to deliver. It's really quite something, really an impressive site, thepublicsquare.com, where they deal with all kinds of cool folks, like comedian Michael Jr., for instance, talks about The Sound of the Father. Laura Hillenberg talks about her book Unbroken, real popular movie. Lose God, Lose Man, Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. Dr. Ben Carson is on there with talking about America the Beautiful. The Wright brothers, David McCullough. I could go on and on. Wonderful things there. I would also like to highlight the magazine First Things. Richard John Newhouse, the late Richard John Newhouse, started this. He was a man who walked with MLK. He was a participant in the culture, and he said, this isn't about conservative versus liberal, Republican versus Democrat. This is being Judeo-Christian ethics in the culture needs to be there. We need to show it, demonstrate it, and show up.
And this is where communication, to me, really, really needs to come into play. What we do is we pretty much practice our religion.
Yeah, absolutely.
Instead of practice our humanity.
Oh, well said.
I mean, and we need to really, really say, okay, when it's time to come to the table to make change, what you stand for, what shield you wear, what badge you say you wear has to be left outside when you come in for the exchange of the good. Culture, for instance, is another thing. And here's what I witnessed, and I'm not saying this because you're sitting there.
No.
If more people practiced how to come outside their culture, outside of their comfort zone, and say, I'm going to go and meet with a demographic of people who aren't like me.
Right.
And just listen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just listen.
Yeah.
And try to figure out, okay, how do I intertwine with this new culture?
That's right.
And the only way to figure it out is to listen, because the culture is not another human element. It's not an alien.
That's right.
It's just another practice of how they do things.
I talk about this all the time, this idea of being pro-people. You know, I don't care who you are, what you do, what you look like. None of that stuff matters to me. If you're a human being, then you're just like me. And what we need to talk about are the things that engage all of us, all of humanity, no matter if we're black or white or conservative or liberal or Republican or Democrat. We're all basically doing the same stuff in this life. So how are we going to do this for the benefit of everybody in a whole culture that's going to make the do-good emphasis of Titus 3 take place?
And this is beautiful. I love this show because we get to expand and think and talk. Mother Eckel's out there listening right now in Colorado, and hello, Mother Eckel, we love you. But, for instance, you were telling me about the music.
Sure.
At first.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if I'm going to like that music. But Mother Eckel's starting to listen to the music and like the music because listening creates that pathway to say, hey, this isn't that bad. I do it with country music all the time. Because country music to me is just like the blues, only it's more guitar-y, twangy, but it's the blues.
Absolutely.
So the connection is I'm listening to the story.
That's right.
And then the music just takes you over. So this is what happens when you get a chance and take the chance to go listen and embrace other cultures. You gave me some examples of Christians, you know, who are making an impact in the public square. What about some of the movies that we can watch where culture is merged and good do good comes
There you
through?
go. Okay. So give you 4 of them today. Every week we come up with different films that I think people might enjoy watching. One of them is called Music of the Heart, starring Angela Bassett and Meryl Streep. In fact, Wes Craven directed this. Now, that's really something because Wes Craven's most noted for his horror flicks, but this movie is the only one that he ever did that was not a horror movie. The whole movie is about teaching violin to inner city youth. It's a wonderful film, Music of the Heart. Another one is called The Gridiron Gang, starring Dwayne Johnson, who formerly called The Rock. There you go. It's about a juvenile detention unit, and the teens learn to work together playing football. It's based on a true story, The Gridiron Gang. Coach Carter, Samuel L. Jackson.
Man, look here.
We could go on.
Give me the tissue.
We could go on and on about Samuel L. Jackson. I just love him. He is a high school coach in this film. Coach Carter is the name of the movie. He benches his whole team for breaking the academic contract that he had with them. It's a story about racial integration. It's wonderful. A true story. And then another true story. Here's the last one for today, called The Blind Side. This is the one that gave Sandra Bullock the Oscar win for Best Actress. It's the true story about how a Christian family takes in Michael Oher, that's spelled O-H-E-R. He became an NFL tackle, still playing today.
All-pro tackle.
He's good, man, and he plays left tackle, which is what The Blind Side is about. He protects the blind side of the quarterback as he's throwing the ball. And that whole movie is based on him, and it's a wonderful story. I highly recommend these movies.
And I'm going to put one in on your list
Good
that
for
is
it.
just, I mean, Remember the Titans is
Yes.
one of the all-time greats as far
There
as
you go.
Denzel Washington becoming a coach at an all-white integrated school.
That's right.
And it is a powerful, powerful movie on building togetherness and team, relationships through accepting the cultures.
That's right.
And that's what we're talking about, being accepting of other people's differences that are unlike yours, because at the end of the day, we breathe the same air.
That's right.
We eat the same foods. we like the same religious beliefs.
Sure.
But for some reason,
Yeah.
to come together at the table, we just don't seem to be able to make it work as a society as a whole. But you have to start someplace, and this is that mustard seed of hope that we're giving
Absolutely.
right now to the community, to have them understand togetherness is going to be the only way. If you're sitting out there watching the despair on the news and watching, look at the differences that we're watching just every night on the news.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about current events.
Right.
all of it is built on ignorance because we're idolatry, I guess, would be the best way.
Sure, yeah, we focus on the things only we care about. Let me give you one more example of this, and this has just happened here on the campus of IUPUI. Cornel West is coming to speak here, but let me tell you about something that happened a few months back. Colonel West and a man by the name of Robert P. George teaches in Ivy League school on the East Coast. Both of these men are Christians. Colonel West and Robert P. George. Colonel obviously is black, Robert P. George white, West is as liberal as the day is long, and George is as conservative as the day is long. There is a fantastic picture of them. They're having a great dialogue at Biola University out in California, and they both have their head bowed. They are holding hands, praying together, and this is on Facebook. Go check it out. Colonel West, Robert P. George, and they are dialoguing together, praying together. Two brothers who desperately disagree about a lot of stuff, but they're holding hands, man. That is so cool.
Well, when we come back, before we close this first hour out, we need to talk about that when we come back because we have a show here. Greg Merriweather does a show, Black on Black. Okay. And this is culturally based. And the thing that we notice more than anything, especially within the African American community, is getting outside of the box of being able to disagree, but still move together in a movement. It's like disagreement means separation, and disagreement doesn't mean separation. Disagreement says, okay, here's what we need to fix. Here's my concern. My disagreement says, here's what we need to fix. Is my concern. Right. It's not like buying in on a religious thing. It's like, okay, how do we leave those differences so we can get positive movement towards what the common goal should be? There you go. And this demographic, my demographic has a hard time figuring that part out. How do we work together and being able to understand that disagreement's going to be on the table? We'll be right back. You are listening to Warp and Woof Radio, and if you're into it, let us know. We're out here on Facebook right now, posting pictures and taking news and information. So you come on back and stay with us on Warp and Woof Radio. RadioNext.tv on the Cool Groove site. Christopher Mann just came into the studio, and we'll be talking to him right at the top of the hour. And Dr. Mark Eckel, Harold H.B. Bell, and we are in here warping and woofing. That means weaving and intertwining wisdom and knowledge about participating in the public square. We want to give big shouts out and love to Tracy Drain and the workers out at 3M enjoying the show today. Thank you guys for listening in. But in speaking on participating in the public square, Mark, name some Christian groups in Indianapolis doing good through the presence in the public square. Sure, absolutely. So I got to give a shout out to my friend Mike Roll, who is in charge of Q Commons. If you're not familiar with Q Commons, check it out. It's a national organization that situates itself throughout cities 4 times during the year. They have these great conversations that are placed in one particular venue. This last one, I believe, was in Boston. And then they broadcast it to all these different cities. Indianapolis is one of them. And Mike Roll does the Indianapolis Q Commons. He does really good work here, brings in all kinds of folks from Indianapolis that are doing good in the public square. Another one, another organization I'd like to mention is Sagamore Institute. Jay Hine is the president there in Indianapolis, and Sagamore is a think tank. It's an academic think tank where they do research and they contribute positive ideas not only to the culture but to political issues, to education, and also to economic concerns. Speaking of economics, I got to say something about Amy Sherman's book. I've got it right here in front of me. It's called Kingdom Calling. In fact, I was so enthused by this book that I actually bought a whole box of books and handed them out to people. I mean, this is how committed I am to this book. Amy Sherman is one of the researchers at Sagamore Institute. She wrote this book a number of years ago now called Kingdom Calling, and in this particular book she tells story after story after story, and I mean hundreds of stories about people that are in the culture, whatever culture they're in, doing whatever they're good at, and they are having an influence to do good in the culture from a Christian point of view. Once again, Amy Sherman, Kingdom Calling, Sagamore Institute, or go to my website, warpandwoof.org, warpandwoof.org, and you can see my review of Amy Sherman's book, Kingdom Calling, there. Let me say this, because sometimes when you're in the middle of your dialogue, you just catch me and I say, wow, this is a great question that we need to ask. Sure. How do people really, if they want to know? I understand my design, and that's a blessing and a benefit that once you find that there's no peace like it on this earth, even through your struggle. When you're living in your design, there's a freedom, so to speak.
Sure.
How do people know that? How do people get it? So when you're mentioning all day long about what you're called to do, how do people know what they're called to do?
I would say to folks just generally, what you're called to do is your passion. So what you love to do during the day, in the general sense of, hey, if I'm a teacher, I'm really good at this. Like my wife Robin is a teacher. She loves to teach. That's what she's all geared up to do in second grade. If you're somebody who likes to work with their hands and you like to be on the job and you're a carpenter, I have a friend Dave who's a great carpenter, does great finish work. That's what he's given to do. He loves to do those kinds of things. I think about the folks that are professors of mine, for instance, that have great interests. One of my professors is committed to the unions, for instance, and working for folks in the workaday world and standing up for those who don't necessarily have a voice. So I really appreciate that. Whatever it is that you're passionate about is what you're called to do. In Christian circles, we call this the vocation that somebody has. So the God-given gifts that you've been given to benefit the people around you, however that is.
And that's an explanation I think the people who are out there listening should take heed to, because we find a lot of good Christian people that are complacent, stagnant, not understanding what they're called to do.
Right.
And that brings misery.
Oh, this brings misery. Well, I just think about a message I got from my friend Colleen up in Michigan yesterday. In fact, she was texting me, Facebook messaging me about this particular issue, and she said, I'm going to be doing a dramatic presentation, and one of the things I want to emphasize is justice. And my students and I came up with this idea that the Christian populace generally has this tendency to be blind, deaf, and dumb. Blind, deaf, and dumb. Here's our problem. We're apathetic. We don't listen to anybody else, and we're not looking outside of our own selves to think, hey, what can I contribute? Is somebody else have a need that I can help out with? Whatever the case might be. We talk about these things all the time, and we actually practice it.
And speaking of the public square, of course, the political elections are coming up here in 2016. Yep. You're going to have a new shift after 8 years of President Obama.
Yep.
What do you think, and how do you respond to folks who say political engagement is like spitting in the wind?
Man, I need an hour.
We do. And I really, politics are one of those subjects that you really don't like to touch on a personal level, but you have to. To make some difference.
If we're going to talk about all spheres of life, if we're going to talk about everybody everywhere that has it can make a difference, Titus 3, do good, then we have to talk about politicians. So for those people who might be out there saying, well, politics, it really gets me messed up, and I really get angry about these kinds of things, my general comment to you is light a candle in the darkness if you don't like what you see going on. Be salt, be light. Do what Jeremiah 29 says. We talked about this a couple weeks ago. Bring peace to the city. Remember that Jeremiah was writing to the Israelites in Babylon. In Babylon, one of the worst, most pagan cities in human history, and he says, bring peace, bring good welfare, bring benefit to this city. So if we don't do this, then I'm going to say to everybody, we cannot complain. Let me just highlight something that is in this book, Kingdom Calling, that I was mentioning just a moment ago by Amy Sherman. She makes this comment, again, out of the book of Proverbs, where we always go every week. She says that this word righteous, or people who are righteous, this word appears 66 times in the book of Proverbs. 66 times. And then she says, now righteous isn't an abstract idea of justice or virtue. It means doing what's right behavior, and then she ends within a community.
There you go.
So what we're doing in Indianapolis is we're bringing the light, we're bringing the salt, we're lighting the candle. Doesn't matter who's in charge. We can talk about whatever governor, whatever president. We're all committed to the same thing, and that is bringing welfare, bringing peace to the city by doing good as Christians.
And let me mention light to the Christian listeners out here. I think it's an obligation. I've told you this before, that God made me light.
Yeah.
I can't have bad days.
Mm-hmm.
And if I do, it's between He and I.
Yes.
Because the serve that I'm supposed to go do every day is be light to people. And I say, if you want people to really embrace Christianity, be light.
There you
because
go.
If they see you in doldrums, people watch you and you say, I'm a Christian.
Yeah.
And every day is woe is me.
Yeah.
Every day you complain.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't want to go be that.
Yeah, exactly.
If I was on the outside looking in, I wouldn't be drawn to that.
Sure.
So to be drawn to Christianity means be light out here and be relevant wherever you are.
Yes.
And then you can make a difference in your walk and maybe in somebody else's life. What books help us prepare to participate as Christians in the public?
Sure. There are so many of them out there. I mean, I was making a list of these things, and I'm just going to I'm going to leave out a whole bunch of them, but I want to talk about some of the ones that made a difference in my life. When I was a teenager, probably the person that made the biggest impact on my life was a man by the name of Francis Schaeffer. Francis Schaeffer talked about there being no difference between the secular sacred, because if the world is made by God, sustained by God, then everything is sacred, everything is God's. And so he's the one who really put me on this path. I never met the man. I just read all of his books by the time I was out of high school. So I would lead with Francis Schaeffer. I want to mention The Naked Public Square by the late Richard John Newhouse. I mentioned him a moment ago with First Things. The Naked Public Square was done in 1988, and Newhouse said, we need to emphasize a Christian point of view. The public square is naked, he said. It's empty without a Christian influence. So just as you were talking about, HB, if you're always going to be down, then you can never produce the light. Another new book, Fool's Talk by Os Guinness. Fool's Talk, Recovering Christian Persuasion, having that dialogue we're always talking about on air. Onward, another book called Onward, Engaging Culture Without Losing the Gospel by Russell Moore, a Southern Baptist, but a good book. D.A. Carson, Christ and Culture Revisited, where he goes back and takes a look at Richard Niebuhr's very famous book to academics from the 1950s, Christ and Culture, and so that's a really powerful book. And just one more name, I can't ever talk about these things without mentioning the great Catholic writer of the last century, G.K. Chesterton, who was way ahead of his time, talking about stuff that we talk about now like it's brand new. G.K. Chesterton, look him up, check him out. All of the things that he wrote about are still true today. That's what we're looking for, is wisdom that is constant every day we can always use.
And before we end this segment, Dr. Mark Eckel, and get to our great guest, Mr. Christopher Mann, in the studio today. The responsibility of us as Christians in the public square. What should we do every day?
Sure. Every single day in the public square, we should manifest ourselves as Christians. Now, if you have any question about what you're supposed to be as a Christian, go read John chapter 13. Jesus makes it pretty clear. He says, everybody will know that you're my disciples if you love one another. Now, when he's talking about that, he's talking about to Christians loving one another. If we could just start within the Christian churches, within the Christian communities, with people black and white and Hispanic and Asian, doesn't matter your ethnicity, doesn't matter your political views. If your point is that you're supposed to love other Christians, man, people are going to be drawn to that. And then, guess what else Jesus said? Amazingly, he said, you're now supposed to go out and love other people. So Paul says this in Galatians 6:10. He says, as much as it's possible for you not only to love your brothers, but to love those outside of the faith. Now, that doesn't mean that we can be involved in every single thing, but it means that in my neighborhood, in my corner of the world where I live and work and have my being, I'm responsible for the people that are there. The classes I'm taking at IUPUI, for instance. I'm going to meet with a young woman later on today who said, hey, she found out I write curriculum. She said, can I help you? I said, sure, I'll help you. I'll be happy to do that. Why? Because it's important to demonstrate the love of Jesus to other people. Be Jesus to other people. That's the answer to your question.
And that's definite. And if you don't believe me, go check out your New Testament and all that red print in those first
there you go.
5 books, and then you might understand just a little more. We'll be right back. Christopher Mann will be giving his great take on how to spread this great word. Dr. Mark Eckel, Harold H.B. Bell, warping and woofing on the radio. RadioNext.tv on the Cool Groove site. Dr. Mark Eckel in the house, Warp and Woof Radio, Comenius Institute. And before we introduce our guests, please let them know about the Comenius Institute one more time. We'd be remiss if we did not mention that great organization.
So Comenius is an organization, a study center that exists on the campus of IUPUI. We have study centers, about 30 of us around the United States. And this study center group is committed to Christians emphasizing what they do in the academy, which is academic and intellectual pursuits. Our website is the ComeniusInstitute.org. My website is warpandwoof.org, and you can find us there. And, of course, our philosophy this particular day is talking about the connection to the public square, and we are concerned about those kinds of things. Just one more time, I'll say, the emphasis in dealing with the public square is a metaphor for a place where people congregate and discuss. They give their voice, but they're also listening. So that's really crucial.
Say that one more time.
They are also listening. That means shut up and listen to other people. So we are just thrilled to death, Chris, that you've come all the way down from Fort Wayne today to see us and talk to us. Tell us a little about yourself, your family, your present pursuits, life goals, and specifically how your Christian beliefs have formed your views of participating in and preserving the public square through communication.
Mark, thanks. It's a joy to be here. Mr. Bell, thanks for bringing me in the studio today. This is awesome. I love what you're doing here. Radio Next, new concept in the internet age. I love it. So thanks for bringing me on board here. I'm excited about what we're doing here, and it's an opportunity to kind of highlight what we do on a regular basis, which is looking to get into the public square, and that has actually been a hallmark of what I've been trying to do for the past 20 years, but dating back to, I'll start at a time that slightly after when I was born at a very early age. I came to faith in Christ in 1988 and then went to college and got involved with a group called Campus Crusade for Christ and really caught a vision there of what God had in mind for me. My wife and I got married after school, and I had too much student debt, so I was going to go on staff with Campus Crusade for Christ, but I had too much student debt, so I needed a job, and I landed into politics. And so I worked for my congressman, who at the time was a guy named John Hosteller, represented the Southwestern District of Indiana. And that launched me into a career of politics and journalism, and worked for a magazine called World Magazine for a little while, and some think tanks and some other political offices. And during that time, I got to experience the effect of smart people, intelligent people, forward-thinking people entering the public square and serving as a preserving and life-affirming catalyst, a culture-affirming catalyst in the public square, and I loved it. I was never an elected candidate myself, but I enjoyed helping other guys get into the public square and make a difference, and that was catalytic for me in my thinking, and I had a kind of a catalytic moment, an extra catalytic moment, if you will. In 2011, I was working for Attorney General of Virginia, and there was a catastrophe in Japan. There was an earthquake. You might remember this, and
tsunami.
Fukushima, a nuclear power plant. It was horrible. Lots of people died, and there were, as the news cycle processed that tragedy, they started to do what news cycles do, which is the ratings are high. They want to keep the ratings high, so they're trying to bring in talking head after talking head to find out this and that detail. And there was really no more, at that time, there were no more updates about the dead and the wounded and the this and that. So they bring someone to talk about the mind of God. And at that point, that brought in someone who, in my candid opinion, really wasn't all that qualified to speak and speculate on such a matter. I thought, oh, they could have gotten so many better candidates than that. Why didn't they? And this is a very relevant question for me, because this is actually the thing that I do. I represent elected officials to go to CNN and to BBC and Boston Globe and the Washington Post and say, hey, here's a subject matter expert you ought to consider for this or that topic if you're going to write another article. And I thought, the reason that they didn't interview any of the people that I have in my mind is because they don't know the people that I have in my mind, and that needs to change. So that started to percolate a new vision for me. I decided in that moment that I wanted to do for pastors what I've been doing for politicians. I wanted to see good guys who understand the Word of God, who faithfully preach the Word of God, to understand how to get their content into the public square. The public square is a metaphor, as you referenced earlier, it sounds big, and sometimes it is big, but sometimes it's rather small. Sometimes it's big. It's the Indianapolis Star editorial page. Sometimes it's small. It's the small newspaper that has a small circulation in a niche part of a township. The point is, wherever that public square is, it's my passion, it's our passion at Resermon to help pastors discover how to push their sermon content, sometimes whole, sometimes piecemeal, sometimes broken up a little bit in chunks that make sense for the community, but to push that sermon content, to repurpose that sermon content into the public square. And today, I have the joy and pleasure of helping writers and marketers and very talented Christ followers use their skills to help pastors repurpose content into a variety of different public squares.
That's wonderful. One of the things that kind of jumped out at me, I was writing down as you were chatting about this, is a couple of ing verbs here. You were talking about preserving, and then you added this phrase, life-affirming. So when you say that you're really after the preserving or the preservation of a culture, but also to be affirming of life itself, you want to unpack that a little bit more for us and help us to understand, what does that mean, life-affirming?
That's an excellent question, and it's an important question to dive into, because there are slogans around that term, and there are, and I support many of those slogans. I used to work as a lobbyist for Indiana Right to Life, so I have a passion for babies. I have a passion for old people at the end of life and needing defensive life too, and also I like to live, so I like my defensive
there you
life.
Go.
But a life-affirming culture is more than those slogans, as important as those slogans and those and all that represents. A life-affirming culture is a culture that respects life even for the people that you may not like in a moment, in general, whatever the context. It means looking at the person who doesn't look like me, or looking at the person who doesn't believe like me, doesn't have the same political affiliation with me. It means a life-affirming culture for them too.
Yes.
Having worked in politics, and there's an R behind my name, I've worked in Republican politics for many years. I've been in the center of what I'll call, in a general way, just difficult, painful political management, and I recognize that this is a coarsening culture, both left and right. My ambition for Resermon is to empower both the religious right and the religious left to show up to City Council. City Council is bereft. It is absent of pastoral intent, a pastoral presence here. I am not so concerned about advocating for a particular right or left religion. I want pastors at City Council. I want them hearing the representatives from the clergy. And yes, I'm more conservative personally, and yes, I am unashamedly pro-life in terms of my defense for babies and the pro-life positions. But the fact is, my passion for Resermon is to help pastors find the public square, because our public square needs salt. It needs preserving. It needs preserving light and catalytic salt.
I really liked what you had to say there about the emphasis on pastoral representation at City Council. I was thinking about, we didn't get a chance to actually talk about this in the first hour, but let me just mention that we have at IMPD a chaplain. His name is David Cote, and he's the chaplain of IMPD. If you want to go back last year, check this out on WTHR. There's a piece there called Minister with a Badge. Minister with a Badge. Check him out, David Cote. Here's a pastor person who's the chaplain at IMPD. He is invested in the culture. He's representing himself there. Wonderful example of this in Indianapolis. Chris, let me just ask this other question here in this first segment as we talk about just general ideas. You mentioned or used the word slogans a moment ago, which always makes me kind of uneasy. You see the memes on Facebook, and social media, and people lobbing hand grenades, verbal hand grenades at each other, Talk a little bit about the problem of slogans and what we need to do to perhaps pull back some of the warfare imagery that we have all around us.
It's another great question because it's so relevant to the problem of the culture. The public conversation, on one hand, can't do without slogans. Slogans is the ability for a culture to speak in shorthand, and we need shorthand.
Okay.
Every time we have a concept, we don't want to just talk about the concept in the long paragraph. It took me last week to explain my concept. If you and I talked about that concept, we use shorthand to get to easier ways to talk about it.
Okay.
Slogans help. They also are a hazard to manage because they start over time. They can lose nuance. Now, while you and I were talking, our friend and host, Mr. Bell, stepped out of the office, and to some extent, he knows what we're talking about, but to some extent, he doesn't know what we're talking about because now that he's returned, he's back into our conversation. So if we start talking in shorthand, he'll know kind of what we're talking about, but he'll miss some things. And that's the danger and the hazard of sloganeering, especially when you start to create public decisions,
yes,
also known as public policy.
Ah.
And you start to try to live on this stuff.
Yes.
And you realize slogans can help because they can get us through conversations easier, but what about new people who come into the conversations? What about people who are just now getting interested in the conversation? They are now just coming to the public square. They don't know all the stuff that goes into that slogan, that goes into that shorthand. It's a hazard.
Yes.
It can often turn into, it's very hazardous.
Yes, sure. Well, let's take another question here just before we go to break. When I think about Chris Mann, when I think about the time that we've spent together and the wonderful conversations we've had, I always think about you as being this impassioned consultant and so on, somebody who is committed to making the transition between information and knowledge and communication so everybody can hear this thing. Tell us about repurposing sermons. Fill that out a little bit more for us, because I don't know if anybody really understands what that even means here and now, but maybe even in history, historical examples of this.
Sure. When I was in politics, we would follow the boss, whether it's the congressman or it's the attorney general, or whoever it is we're working for. We'd follow him around, and when he would deliver a speech, and with this group, we'd repurpose that speech into maybe another kind of speech that's going to be delivered to a different kind of audience later on, or we tweet it out, we Facebook it out, we do something with it to leverage the time, because he doesn't have a lot of time to spare, so the time that he does have, we want to leverage it as much as possible. This is a very common thing for politicians to use, for business people to use, and even sometimes for attorneys and doctors to use sometimes. But it's very not known to pastors.
Okay.
And so my passion was to show pastors how to repurpose their content. And the repurposing the content is all calculated in my view, our view, to help expand audience penetration. So a sermon doesn't sit in a church, or it doesn't sit merely as an MP3 file or an MP4 file on a website, but it has an opportunity to reach more people.
Yes.
One of the lowest hanging fruits to reach more people is simply to make a sermon discoverable. You might say, what does that mean? Well, what it at least means is transcribing the sermon. When you transcribe a sermon, you make a searcher, an online searcher, able to search for hope, search for lost, search for marriage, or whatever, a number of different terms. And if you have preached those words in your sermon, now your sermon is discoverable. That's a concept that pastors often haven't thought about. Secondly, we take that transcript and we make a closed caption file for it. This means that the deaf and hard of hearing now can hear your sermon, your sermon, play on words here. But the fact is, they can't hear your sermon because they can't hear. So closed caption technology immediately expands your sermon outreach by sometimes 20 to 25% in any given city.
Wow.
Because there's not only deaf people in the city, there's hard of hearing. There's people like you and me who are getting older,
That's
not
right.
younger.
That's right.
We're saying what to each other a lot. But there's more people. There's Iraqi combat veterans coming back. They didn't get blown up, but they did come back with concussions, and it's harder for them to hear. Captioning is a huge part of the Netflix business model.
Absolutely.
Google Play business model. Lots of people want captions, not just the hard of the deaf, but the hard of hearing. Closed captioning is also an immigration solution.
Ooh.
Have you ever thought about that?
Nice. No, I haven't.
Closed captioning is an immigration solution. What do missionaries do? What's the first thing that missionaries do when they go across the ocean and they land a mission in, name your favorite country? What do they start doing?
Language or culture?
Right. They typically run into a wall called illiteracy. There are people who would like to hear that curious message, but we don't have a common language, and so the missionaries set up an outpost and they start to teach language. And one of the things they do is start to teach biblical literacy. Okay. Well, immigrants coming here often are thinking, I just want to know, especially in the American experience, what's America like? Well, missionary-minded Americans can close caption the sermons we've already put tens of thousands of dollars into putting on Vimeo and YouTube already.
We're going to take a break because this is very interesting. I'm getting a text right now from a minister, small church, listening to what you're talking about expanding his ministry on a global platform. This is better than they could ever get. We're going to come right back. Dr. Mark Eckel, Christopher Mann, and we are warping and woofing today on the radio, people. RadioNext.tv on the Cool Groove site. Dr. Mark Eckel, Harold H.B. Bell, the Comenius Institute presents Warp and Woof Radio, and Christopher Mann is in there. Man, you are adding some light to this fire in here today. And Dr. Mark, take it away. I'm listening and enjoying myself on this.
All right. So, Chris, some people listening might wonder, why would anybody be interested in the kind of work you do? You mentioned re-sermon just a moment ago before we went off air. Is what you offer really valuable to the church generally speaking?
That's an excellent question. I think the refinement would need to be to ask what kind of church. There's many churches that want to be cultural bastions of fellowship out in the suburbs, and I can imagine some value to them. I'm not sure I can imagine much value to them. Why? Because the services I have that Resermon offers is wholly calculated for reaching more people and deeper people. Okay, taking sermon and repurposing it into deeper and higher echelons of society. Before the break, we were talking about closed captioning as an immigration solution.
Yes.
And that is one of the things I'm most excited about, because the fact is immigrants come here, they need to learn the language. How do they learn the language? Well, we can actually close caption sermon content and do what they're already trying to do. They're going to Google and watching video, turning on the automated Google captions so they can try to piece out what the person's actually saying, and they're learning English this way.
That's right.
The medium's a very tolerant way for the immigrant to learn English. It's not going to bite their head off when they misunderstand it, etc. Why not take good biblical content and close caption it, teach and tutor this guy to learn English this way? We're already doing it. Why not make it easier on the immigrant? And in doing so, introduce the gospel to them.
Absolutely.
So,
this is fascinating.
Yeah, that's part of the vision for how we want to take. That's why I think it's wonderfully valuable to the church. If the church, it's a huge if.
Yes.
But if this particular local body of believers on the west side of Indianapolis or on the north side of Fort Wayne or the southeast side of Houston or wherever they are, if they really are interested in reaching their target demographic, then yes, we are very relevant to them. If they want to be a fellowship, I think they've got everything they need to be insular and protected and from the world and whatnot. I might recommend breaking up the church a little bit higher so no one else can get in. But those are not churches I really can serve.
Right. Yeah. You struck on a word there that is really of interest to me, this concept of being insular. How much responsibility do you think that church leaders play in connecting with culture with a thorough biblical approach? I mean, would you say that pastors are insular? And maybe you want to actually break up that word and define it for us a little bit. How are pastors insular, and why is that a problem in connecting the congregation to the culture?
These questions like these are questions I would love to take with someone like George Barna right next to me, because I'd like to go ahead and he's going to know more data about the larger sense of the church, the larger opinion of the church. I have anecdotes, and they inform what I do and how I do it. But there is a sense of insularity that I see among church pastors, and I have my theories as to why that is. I was a couple of years ago. I was calling on some churches in the Midwest. And then I hit this one in Oklahoma. I offered to provide closed captioning to a sermon so he could have access to deaf and hard of hearing folks. And he proceeded to lecture me for about 10-15 minutes about how I'm using the ways of the world to try to do the work of God.
Unbelievable.
And I know this man this guy was representing a good church. It was a faithfully Trinitarian preaching church, so this is not a weirdo church, but I know the guy had a car, using the way of the world to actually commute to work every day. Is that insularity? It's a kind of insularity. It's a mentality of being stuck in the past and mistaking what I think is a mistaken understanding of what his calling is. He can use the tools of modern tools of communication to accomplish gospel missions, and so there is insularity. I see it kind of on an anecdotal basis. I love hearing about smart guys like George Barna who understand these at a larger level.
Yeah, sure. So when I hear you talking about the insular problem, where people just want to stay to themselves, they really don't want to go outside of their own church body or really be invested in any way in the culture around them. This leads me, of course, to this idea that the church tends to separate itself from the culture at large, thinking that what is spiritual does not relate to what's cultural. So where does this thinking come from, and how do you respond to that kind of thinking?
Everything's spiritual. And that's my bias. I think that's a biblical bias.
Sure.
That God is the first cause of everything. So
there you go.
He has a domain over everything, and just as to go the other direction is to start to dabble in that ancient old Gnosticism of duality.
Yes.
So I encourage pastors, and many pastors are already at that conviction that no, they do want to be proactive. Yes, they may be. And I'm imagining a profile right now of a white pastor out in the suburbs. He's got his big ministry. I say 7, maybe even 9 times out of 10, that profile pastor wants to have a preserving effect in the culture, even in parts of the city where he's not very acquainted with, like read urban context, racially diverse ministries. He wants to have relevance there. He wants to help. And he doesn't always know how to help. He doesn't know how to get into the public square. He doesn't actually know how to encourage and empower his subordinate staff to get in there and do work. He doesn't know how to work and encourage his congregation to go out and do this. And that's what Warrior Sermon loves to do. We love to actually take a sermon content, turn it into blog posts, turn it into editorials. We like to take the youth ministers' sermon content, turn into blog posts and Facebook posts, push it out to their kids. They all have iPhones now. Turn around, like the stuff, push it out to their friends. Their friends who are doing smoking pot and doing all sorts of other stuff. That's the way that you strategically start to have and that, quite frankly, getting back to my original testimony, that's how I became a Christian back in 1988. People came into my world. They didn't wait for me to come to their world, but the Christians came to me.
Yeah.
And that's the catalytic, preserving effect that the church can have when it thinks about how to repurpose its people, their people's talents and the sermon content, the preached word of God, deeper into the public square.
It interests me, this whole concept about strategy. When you mention this, I think about Jesus' strategy was obviously to draw around him a group of men who are going to take this gospel after he leaves, being empowered by the Holy Spirit and making a difference in the culture. I think about the Apostle Paul, for instance, who everywhere he went, he took a team of people with him. So there was a strategy that included a group of people, and their focus was on one city, one particular issue, one particular individual, whatever the case might be. When I think about what you do in terms of a strategic emphasis, you talk about your connection, let's say, for instance, to the immigrant population, and you just mentioned the church and the difficulties that you find sometimes in the church that don't want to have a broad thinking base. How do you begin the process of getting invested or even introduced to folks like this so that they can begin to hear what you have to offer?
Excellent question. I've written about this quite a bit at my at the blog, resermon.com/blog. It's on the web, and it is one conversation after another. It's usually in person. My conversations with pastors usually take the form of me explaining this. They turn around and say, "Wait, now that's interesting. Can you say it over again?" Because it is such a new concept. It's kind of like websites in 1995. Mm-hmm. When you're introducing the concept of website to a pastor in 1995, it's not that he understands the English that you're saying, but he doesn't understand the concept, and he can be very forgiven for it. It's just a brand new concept. What do you mean? They didn't teach us this in seminary, so evidently you're trying to tell me something different that it has something to do with my sermon. Now, what's this website again? Well, I'm doing something similar here, and I'm saying that sermon was a great start, but I'm ready to call it a lousy finish. Not because I'm willing to indict the previous 2,000 years worth of sermons. They didn't have access to this stuff, so there's no deal. But look what you have access to. Your sermon has a great start. It doesn't have to finish here. Let's help it finish well.
Can I interject for a moment?
Yeah,
because of course I've been in and out of the room, but I've been listening in the other room. Connected learning. When you're introducing, and we talk about this all the time. Where are the pastors? And so to be able to effectively talk about in 1995 what a website was, how do we connect that? And I use the tools of today, much like I tell people about Jesus on the Mount. 3,000 people showed up. They didn't have Twitter. They didn't have a beeper. They didn't have the phone. They didn't have any way to mass communicate to say, hey, 3,000 people, Jesus is going to be on the Mount preaching.
And arguably they might have been better off for it. That's another discussion.
Yeah, that's another discussion. But we're going to take a short break because we want to end this up on a real good note. Christopher Mann's in the house. Dr. Mark Eckel is making it happen here again. Information exchange is what we do on Warp and Woof Radio. RadioNext.tv on the Cool Groove site. I cannot help it, but that huge groove is one of my favorites, and that was for Mother Eckel. But we're having a great time in here in the studio today. Christopher Mann is in the house, and just talking about how to take the tools of the 21st century. As Brian Hudson so eloquently told us, technology is the science of utilizing the tools of the day, not the hardware.
That's right.
Dr. Mark, as you end this show up.
Sure. Let's ask some more questions here of our guest, Christopher Mann. Just going back to some of this problem of churches wanting to be separate from the culture, how do churches and church leaders show a fear of cultural engagement? And then we'll bring it back to a positive spin. But how do you see the churches showing a fear of cultural engagement?
You and I share a common history, and we used to teach for Crossroads Bible College. I think you still have some ongoing classes there, and that's been an enriching experience for me. I teach up in Fort Wayne, and that has been a wonderful experience. Not the first experience in my career, but a wonderful episode, and it has taught me a number of things about the image of God and the fickleness of the image of God. And it's taught me about courage. It's taught me about timidity. It's taught me about cowardice. It's taught me about how if God is a lover of the image of God, He loves his image, and he also characterizes himself as not a respecter of men. That's an interesting juxtaposition. And he loves the image, but he says, "But wait, I'm not calling myself a respecter of men." And he says, "I reserve glory and worship for myself." And when my tenure with Crossroads and other venues too, I've been involved in city ministry and suburban ministry for many years. My experience has taught me that men want to be godly, and black pastors want to be godly, white pastors want to be godly, and fear mucks it all up. Fear of the wrong thing mucks it all up. C.S. Lewis said it best. He said, worshiping any god but the true God is a cruel God. And the fear of God is paramount in our ability to get anything meaningfully done. Fear of man is such a bad trade. And insularity, is what you're talking about, I think starts with fearing the wrong God.
Oh, wow.
I think good, worthwhile ministry hinges on fearing the true God.
Okay. So when you're talking about the difference between fearing God and fearing man, the idea, of course, coming back to the question, is that really inhibits any kind of connection to the culture, because now we're demonstrating some disconnect with the very people that we're supposed to be reaching, right? Isn't that the truth?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Being willing to propagate your message deep into the culture, even when you know you're going to get kicked back. God is a lover who initiates. He uses the metaphor of a husband. He initiates love to a people who prick him back, who he endures love as he deeply dives into a group of people who prick him back, and he keeps on doing it over and over again. That's the image of a loving God that he then turns to us. He says, "Now you know how I've been trying to love this culture, and they keep on pricking me back. Mark, you do the same." By the way, Mark, you're the one who's been pricking me hard. I want you to look toward the example that I've been doing for you, and then I want you in turn to love the culture and expect about the same results, okay?
Wow. So here we go. I'm going to ask this question because honestly, this is the follow-up, and this is going to hit a lot of people the wrong way. But y'all need to listen to this particular question and then the response.
Mark's getting ready to be pricked back.
Yeah, that's right. How can the church see itself as an outreach to the mainstream media? I mean, I hear people talk about the media like it's this horrendous devil all the time. How do we outreach to the mainstream media, or even to those cultural outlets which seem to be against the Christian view of life and things? How do we do that?
A lot of different ways. And I love this question because I've spent some of my career in the media, some of it in the mainstream media. And sometimes it kind of feels like there's just one word, the liberal mainstream news media. It's like one word, no spaces. It's just one big entity. The fact is they're made of the mainstream media, and the other stream media, fill in the blank, is made up of images of God, not ducks, not horses, not brontosauruses, images of God who need redemption. Like I needed redemption in 1988, and like you needed redemption back in the 20th century, or whenever that was. And the fact is, there are so many opportunities. One of the opportunities, I've written about this a little bit at resermon.com. One of the opportunities that I would love, my vision, is for pastors to repurpose their sermon content into editorials called op-eds. Yeah. This is very commonly known in the political arena. What's an op-ed? Op-ed's something that runs the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or something. But it traditionally, what that means is opposite the editorial. Okay, it's an opinion piece that runs in newspapers. On the left-hand side of your editorial page will be something approximating the official position of a newspaper. Okay, opposite of that page are the other stuff in the community, okay? this guy has an opinion on taxes, that lady has an opinion on whatever. What my passion is for pastors to re-enter that space, okay? Because their perspective on tax policy is relevant. Their perspective on what we should do with that blight or this this bad property that needs to be repurposed or something. Their perspective on the community is very important, but they never show up. Now, here's at a more granular level what I would love to see. The means by which you get on the editorial page is that you have to go through a copy editor. Some guy has to actually read the stuff that comes in the mail of the newsroom and says, hey, I've written this stuff, I'd like to be considered for your op-ed section sometime. Someone has to read this stuff. And typically, it's a 23, 24-year-old kid who just got out of journalism school.
That much depth.
Yeah. And he's been given the job of, okay, hey kid, read this stuff. There's 1,000 letters. We can fit 7 of them today. You got to read all 1,000 of them, make recommendations to us as to what's going to get on the page today. Well, what happens, just theoretically, what happens if this kid over the course of a week has to read through 23 sermons because a bunch of pastors are just trying to get on the op-ed page? What kind of sanctifying effect do you think I might have on that copy editor? Mm-hmm. He does that for 5 days a week. He does that for 50 times a year. 3 years later, light bulb goes on in his head. You know what? I hear people criticizing these guys because they're left-wing nuts or they're right-wing nuts or they're other... And that doesn't make sense because I read their stuff on a regular basis. And I also know the kind of people who criticize these people. And I know that the people who criticize these people are actually know a whole lot less than what these people are writing about and sending me on a regular basis. I think they're actually reasonable people. And I like them. And in fact, they write stuff that's better and it's more timely and more punctual than the other. I'm putting some of these people on my editorial page. That is a saltifying, that is a preserving catalytic event right there. Not only have you impacted this kid for Christ, now he's 28 and he's thinking, by the way, this Jesus thing is actually interesting too.
I love it.
It's really good.
Where in the United States of America, where is the most unreached people group? Again, I'd love to stop, pause, say, George Barnum, what is that people group? I don't know. But so we come back to Chris Mann and his anecdotal thinking here. One of those people groups is called the liberal mainstream news media, or the other mainstream news media, the media. The media. They generally have a very suspicious attitude toward people of faith. And why? Well, I think it's because we don't talk to them.
Yeah.
I think it's because their 23-year-old copy editors don't have to read any of their stuff. I think it's because the Indianapolis pastors don't bother sending anything to the Indianapolis Star and the Noblesville Times and the Johnson County fill in the blank.
Yeah, this just strikes me as a wonderful opportunity for everybody that's listening, not only live but on the future podcast. To really, really, really consider how are you going to make a difference in the culture, to do good. And one of the ways that you can do that is by emphasizing exactly what Chris is doing here, and that's repurposing sermon content into blogs and Facebook posts and so on. Chris, if there was just 30 seconds of, hey, I want to leave my listeners with this one thing, these two things, what would they be this morning?
Everything we've talked about is critical stuff, and I really appreciate bringing me on the air today. At resermon.com, we can either do this work for you, we can actually take your sermon content, repurpose into the public square. We also come on and teach your staff how to do it, because it's not brainiac stuff. It's smart stuff. There are some skill sets that are important, but we can also coach your staff into actually doing it for yourself.
Those are wonderful words. HB, I don't know, man. You've been getting hit up with texts now from pastors, is that right?
Reverend Pierce, I'm calling him, is 12:15. He'll be calling me right after the show. He's listening and definitely participating in the public square. And Christopher, you put it right on point, man. We have to participate in this public square. We have to have a voice if we want people to be unafraid of what we're talking about on a platform like this. So just thank you so much today.
I've so enjoyed being here. Thank you so much.
Dr. Mark Eckel, you are the man. And my friend, I must say that, and my brother.
Absolutely.
But until next week, Warp and Woof Radio, Comenius Institute, please go out and support and just check it out. I mean, be informed. All we're doing is providing information to a public so deservingly needing it. And we're just going to be back next week, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the Cool Groove site.